Thank you for having me. It's a great honor and pleasure to talk here at the first conference at Morgantown. So I've gotten into this space maybe 8-9 years ago at Mercatus, together with Matt, prompted by Jerry, wherever she sits right now, there she is. And so it has been a wonderful experience for me, and a great learning experience, and also was great in terms of the future work after that. I mean, it was great in terms of the papers that came out of it, the publication, and even more rewarding, I found the interactions we had then later on with policymakers or involvement in some lawsuits. And so it seems to me that, as James mentioned in an earlier presentation, that I think maybe we've moved the needle a little bit. Maybe we can claim some credit for some of the repeals that happened over the last 5-6 years. But nonetheless, certainly our work did not hurt. So this paper, I mean, is, let me just actually backtrack. So Matt and James in the previous two presentations gave some great, wonderful overviews about the current state of the research, where it might want to go. And it included, talk about, what is the effect of CON on access, on quality of services provided, on expenditures, on prices, on quality of medical services, so on and so forth. And so in some sense, we're sort of having all these good arguments as economists, why CON restricts competition, why a competitor's veto is not going to be helpful for consumers. It seems like we have all the right arguments, but somehow the legislature doesn't see it. They don't overturn the laws. So why is this? And what I'm talking about today sort of goes to that effect, trying to understand why is it that these laws do not go away. And there are certainly many ways to think about this, many ways to analyze this. Here, we're going to look at whether applications for a certificate of need are granted or not, and whether the pressure of interest groups or the political pressure of the applicant is going to be an important determinant of whether the application is granted or not. So in the general framework, as this purpose slide says, and you can think of this as we're studying the effect of interest group pressure on regulatory decisions. Why is it that interest group pressure affects regulatory decisions, or maybe perhaps these pressures do not affect these decisions? And then that is the general overreaching question. And then we're going to drill down in specifics, meaning we're going to look at certificate of need applications. So, okay. So what's the motivation? I mean, it's sort of a little bit like an academic talk. I mean, that's what it's just meant to be. What's the motivation of this? Well, we have barriers to entry. And barriers to entry into business create rents. And meaning, even though we may have a tough time showing it in the data, I mean, once you have barriers to entry, we have rents. Some people are benefiting from it, and these firms will compete to obtain these rents. They will compete to obtain favorable regulation. That is just sort of the commonly told story in economics, starting with Gordon Tullock, who talked about rent seeking. And while we have a pretty good conceptual understanding what rent seeking means, meaning we have lots of theoretical models. There's over dissipation of rents, under dissipation of rents, this and that. There's really not that much empirical evidence out there talking about, how is the rent seeking working? and what are really the gains from entry, from rent seeking. So that is something we're going to look at here. Of course, there is some work of the effect of lobbying and maybe campaign contributions on the legislative process in terms of, do campaign contributions from an interest group, increase the probability that a vote in the House passes, a vote favoring the interest group. There is a bunch of work on that, but there is very little on the regulatory side. And in part, this is the case, at least in my view, because the regulatory outcome is very hard to measure, because it's very often very subtle. My colleagues at Mercedes are putting together, have been putting together a list of regulations that have passed, but often the devil is in the details, and it's really hard to quantify to what extent these regulations benefit the interest group or not. And here is just a slide, just showing you what is the work out there to my extent and to my knowledge, and maybe I missed something, and I'm happy to learn about other studies that studied the effect of interest group pressure on regulations. So in all of these studies, for example, are legislators more likely to perhaps approve a merger when the parties are contributing to congressmen or to contributing to state legislators. Also, the second bullet, work on the state regulatory commission. All these studies are kind of at the state level, where the unit of observation is the state. So we're comparing essentially one state to another state often. So that's kind of the work out there. So what I'm trying to do in this paper, and this is work that originated with a graduate student, Steve Monahan, early some years ago, and I've now pushed this work a little bit further. In some sense, it is still very much work in progress, and I sort of really welcome any comments you may have. And I'm in the process of collecting more data to supplement this. But this is basically what we have in these, what I'm going to show you. And these are, I believe, going to be some interesting insights we're going to gain from this work, I hope. So I said I wanted to answer the general question in terms of how do interest groups affect regulatory decisions by looking at certificate of need regulations. And why is certificate of need such a good application? One, I said, it's regulatory decisions are easy to measure. We're going to look at, is there approval of an application, yes or no? So that's one reason. So we're not, again, to put it in context, we're not trying to explain whether some states have a certificate of need law and other states do not. That's not the purpose of this particular study. The study here is about, why can regulators approve some applications but not others? That is the question over here. From a data perspective, this is kind of an interesting topic also, because even though everybody in this room knows what certificate of need regulations are, I think the number of the people in the population that know about this is not large. So they're somewhat obscure, low salience, low newspaper coverage, and we know that when issues of low salience, then interest groups have a better chance to be influential. And that has been shown in several other works. And so this is one of the reasons why this is an interesting, this corn application topic it's an interesting issue to study, because again, it is that is low scrutiny. It doesn't going to be in the newspapers that often. Another reason why this is interesting is because regulators have a lot of discretion of whether to approve the call application or not. I mean, yes, officially there is maybe some formula. Is there a need or is there not a need in some states? But these formulas can be changed anytime, because these formulas can be always adjusted also to whatever the politics are of the day. So there's nothing, set in stone what need is. And other regulators in some states decide these things kind of ad hoc without a formula. So, and whenever regulators have a lot of discretion, you can imagine that for those type of issues, it's very attractive for interest groups to start lobbying. Because, nothing is set in stone. Everything is negotiable. And so that gives another reason for groups to enter this political space. So just again, just in terms of the general framework where we are, so we're looking at a rent-seeking model in the spirit of Gordon Tullock, and it's just very straightforward from a theoretical perspective that call laws restrict the supply of medical services, and therefore, once you have a supply restriction, you get economic rents. So, and the hypothesis that we want to test in this paper is whether donations, and with donations I mean campaign contributions to election campaigns, to state politicians increase the probability of corn approval. So you may think, well, wait a minute, contributions to politicians and corn approval, can that stuff really be linked? And the working hypothesis in this paper is yes. The idea is that, firms, hospitals, medical providers are maybe contributing to a politician, to the governor, or to a senator, to a state senator. And then in turn, the state senator or the governor might give a call to the health department or whoever the regulator is. And especially here we're going to focus on also contributions, not just to the governor, but also to senators or candidates for Senate, because in the application, the states we're going to be looking at, which is going to be Virginia, Michigan, and Georgia, where the state Senate approves the legislator or appoints the corn regulator. So there's a link between the corn regulator and the state Senate. And so the mechanism is that medical providers influence essentially the corn regulator through giving contributions to the politician. And I say there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and I say ask Matt in this slide, because Matt knows a lot of anecdotal evidence about corruption in corn. Like, he told me about stories in Illinois where actually the governor went to jail because of corruption. There are some stories from Louisiana, I believe, and there are many more. So we're not going to talk about those in details, but we're going to go straight to some data analysis. So to have a better sense of where this data analysis goes, I just wanted to remind ourselves how what are the different points where there can be perhaps some political intervention from state politicians in terms of calling up the agency. So first, there's usually the letter of intent, and then once the letter of intent is given the thumbs up from the regulator, you can actually formally apply. And actually, the biggest drop-off in our data is actually between step 1 and step 2, because if the regulator signals to you after the letter of intent, there's no chance we're going to approve the application, yes, you're going to apply. Then there's typically a public hearing, sometimes with competitors present or not. like other hospitals being present, incumbent hospitals being present or not. And then the review agency decides, and then there's going to be a final decision. The final decision makers makes a decision, and I'm just the bottom bullet. What that just refers to is something I mentioned before, that the decision makers in the states we are considering, they're appointed by the state governor with Senate confirmation. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is to motivate why I'm using campaign contributions given from hospitals and other applicants to the governor and to the to candidates running for the state. So we're looking at 3 states: Georgia, Michigan, and Virginia. And these data are in part publicly available from monthly activity reports. For Michigan, we got the data via a FOIA request. So that's basically where we get the data from for whether a application is approved, yes or no. And then we're using money from the National Institute on Money in State Politics, which is collecting data on campaign contributions given to individual state legislators. And we also know the dates. We know the dates these contributions are given. We're going to employ that. And regarding dates, the data I mentioned before in the previous slide, or no, over here, from Virginia, the years covered in our data set are for Virginia, it's going to be from about the year 2000 to 2015. But for Georgia and Michigan, it's primarily between 2010 and 2015. So we have many more observations for Virginia than for Georgia and Michigan. And again, as I mentioned, I'm currently in the process of updating this data, and that more richer data may allow for a more deeper analysis than we have right now. So I'm going to talk about 2 questions we're going to ask and tell you what the results are going to be. So these questions relate to the hypotheses I mentioned before. So one issue that is of interest to examine is just to know the landscape, meaning do hospitals that apply apply for a CON contribute more to state legislators than hospitals that do not apply for a CON. So this is a little bit different than what I mentioned before in terms of, is a CON application approved, yes or no? For this first question, I'm just going to consider hospitals that applied for a CON at some point and compare these hospitals to other hospitals in the states that did not apply. And I'm going to ask, well, is the political activity between non-applicants and applicants similar, or is it different? And so that's exactly the question. And here we're looking at contributions made within the 2 years of the letter of intent application. So what do we expect then? We would expect that if there is something to the case that firms spend resources to obtain a CON, then you would expect to see is that campaign contributions are going to be larger if a hospital applies than if it doesn't apply. Or for hospitals that apply versus that do not apply for a CON. And here you have the comparison. So basically what I have here, so this is basically, and the reason I put this actually is the log campaign contributions, the natural log of campaign contributions, because otherwise this would have been almost unreadable. I'll tell you in a second why. So over here, if I get this mouse to work, to the top, yeah, I see it now. Yeah, okay.
Screen was up.
So basically, we are looking at the The left two histograms bars are for Georgia applicants and non-applicants. So basically, you see the law contributions of law applicants is basically 0. And then for Michigan, what you have is, the law contributions is 0.5 for applicants and basically 0.1 for non-applicants. What that says is that in Michigan, applicants contribute 5 times as much as non-applicants. And, and then you see the comparison then for Virginia, where they contribute many thousand times as much as non-applicants. So this is, and similarly for Georgia. Now I'll just give you a different flavor of this. So this is quite a stunning diagram in my view, in that it shows you, people who are not trying to get a con, they're just not politically active. And the reason is they have nothing to gain, but those hospitals that have something to gain, they're going to spend a lot of money. And so over here is a different view of the data. And so I'm not sure what this mouse is doing. Maybe it's this one. Oh, yeah, I got it. So, thank you. So basically over here, look at, for example, there's a number of observations. So we have just going maybe through one example, Georgia, 115 hospital applicants, non-applicants. So we looked at the rest of the hospitals in Georgia. There are 183 that did not apply. Here are the mean contributions. So applicants on average contributed $390 per legislator, and non-applicants contributed $1.5. And so this is the same, we see the same pattern, the difference in Michigan, 620 versus 40, and in Virginia, it's extreme. And actually, Virginia has a very strong hospital association, as I learned from personal experience. They came over to us and wanted to talk to us at Mercatus, wanted to educate us and about what are the right numbers. So this is just the same. This is also the same information I showed to you before in the graph, and from this, there seems to be something going on. This it's unlikely that this would have happened by random chance. There are several reasons. There's also some benign explanation, perhaps, you can use to explain that. Perhaps, the guys who are applicants, they're more powerful in general, they have other interests as well, and therefore they contribute. But the differences are so stark that the benign explanation seems not quite plausible. The second question is, going back to how I started the talk, where the contributions from applicants are possibly correlated with con approved. Okay, so now we're looking at all applicants in the states. We're not focusing anymore on hospitals and divide the sample between non-applicants and applicants. Now we're just looking at people or firms or providers that applied for certificate of need. For a certificate of need. And so thinking about this, this goes back a little bit to the mechanism. So we're thinking that contributions somehow result in influence, and then this influence that these contributors receive result into approval. That's kind of the mechanism that's going on. And what we're going to estimate here is just sort of the reduced form, where we cannot observe the influence, we cannot observe, we cannot observe that an interest group goes to a politician and says, please provide, go to the regulator. We don't observe the politician calling up the regulator. That's the influence part. We don't see that. So what we're just going to do is going to just relate contributions to approval, and then with some control variables. And there are some limitations to that. I'll talk about that in a second. I'm sure many come to your mind right away. But nonetheless, this is sort of an instructive way of taking a first pass. So we're going to, our left-hand side variable is that what we're going to explain is whether an application was approved, yes or no. 1 if it's approved, 0 if not approved. And what does What does not approved mean? It basically means either denied, withdrawn, or the letter of intent is expired. Expires if the provider doesn't follow up. And the contributions definitions I mentioned before. And in the first set of results, I'll show you contributions given within 2 years plus minus of the letter of intent. And we also look at other definitions because who knows exactly, there's no theory to guide us to say, which kind of contribution at what date is going to be important for influencing the regulatory process. Here are just a few numbers in terms of approval. Here is this is a percentage of corn applications approved. So in Georgia, we had for the time period about almost 60%. In Michigan, about 78%, and in Virginia, around 50% of the applications are approved. Michigan is kind of relatively high, and that might have to do with what Matt mentioned earlier in the talk, that Michigan doesn't have a competitor's veto. So the competitors, the incumbent providers, cannot participate in the hearing process or in the entire corn process, while it's definitely possible in Virginia and Georgia. And that actually may not only explain the higher approval rates, it also gonna maybe explain some of our empirical findings. These are just summary statistics that just gives you a rough idea of what we have. So we have, what I want to say is that in terms of number of observations, we have roughly 400 observations for Georgia, 1,600 observations for Michigan, and Virginia, we have about 2,000. The reason the contribution level over here has fewer observations than the entire data set is because some applicants don't contribute. So those are going to be coded as 0 in us. But the reason I just gave you the difference is to give you a sense of, what is the percent of applications that are associated with a campaign contribution. And in terms of the approval rates, this over here just reflects again the histogram I showed you before. Georgia, about 56% of approval rates, Michigan, 70%, and Virginia, 51%. So let's talk about some of these results. So basically now we're going to look at the effect of contributions on favorable decisions. So what we're going to have, these are bivariate regressions. Okay, so we only have one right-hand side variable, which can be either going to be a dummy. The first two columns are bivariate regressions. These are going to be a dummy for whether there is any contribution, yes or no. And then this is the contribution amount in logs. Okay, so transformed in a way that we can also can include 0 contributions. And so these are the bivariate coefficients for Georgia, Michigan, and Virginia. And so this FE fixed effects are just, he says no, over here says yes. Let's focus on the first two columns. The no just means basically we're going to have these bivariate regressions. So what does this point estimate tell us? It tells us that if you contribute, you have a 35% higher chance of having your approval, your call application approved. Okay, so, and for Michigan, the chance actually is much lower, it's 9%. Maybe this goes back to what I mentioned before, that the Michigan, there is less stiff opposition in terms of competitors' veto. And then in Virginia, again, a big effect of almost 30%. So a campaign giving to a legislator, state legislator, is associated with a 30% increase in the likelihood of being approved. Now, and then we have that's sort of the first set of results. And then the second set of results looks at the contribution levels. And so, again, we have the contributions in logs. So the way to interpret this coefficient over here is that in Georgia, a 1% increase in contributions increases the chance of approval by 0.05%. And here by Michigan, 0.01%, Virginia, 0.04. And is that big? Yeah, it's huge, actually, because you know, how much are these guys giving? They're giving maybe, let's say, we had some of the statistics before, you know, the contribution level in Virginia, Georgia was 28,000 on average, 10,000 in Michigan, and Virginia 25,000. So just a 10% increase in contributions, which is something like, you know, $2,000 perhaps, increases the chance of approval by 4 percentage points. And so, given the rents and the gains from this activity, this seems very large. The last two columns are talking about fixed effects over here. It's not quite, I should have written indicators, because this controls for the region in the state, it controls for year dummies, for the years considered, it controls for the type of application, whether it's perhaps for MRIs or for something else. So that's a bunch of control variables, and you see the coefficients, you know, compare this coefficient to this coefficient, or this coefficient to this coefficient. The coefficients shrink a little bit, but not by much in terms of telling the story. This is just a slide telling you that I didn't cherry pick the window. In terms of, as mentioned before, I looked at a time window of 2 years before and 2 years after in terms of contributing, 2 years before and after in terms of when the letter of intent was filed. So looking at various other levels like half a year, 1 year, 2 years, basically does not change the results. We don't need to go through these things. So let me come actually a little bit to a close now, discussing what to take from this. So clearly a concern that is, or at least for some people, I mean, the correlations are very informative, and lots of our work, and I think lots of work influencing policies is correlation, not some causal analysis maybe, which is totally non-transparent. Nonetheless, it's a totally fair question to ask, you know, are the estimates presented over here, are they unbiased? Because you could tell a story that, you know, perhaps these effects we have are overestimated, meaning if the powerful Richmond Hospital gives to state legislators that are going to act in their favor anyway, then perhaps you're going to overestimate the effect. And there are stories to be told that we can also potentially underestimate the effect. If you perhaps give to people who are not going to be that favorable to your views. Mostly, I would think we're going to overestimate the effect. These are going to be probably a little bit too large. However, we also, this doesn't mean that these effects are worthless, because you see that they're huge. They're huge in terms of, giving at all increases the probability of getting approved by about 40% or 30% percentage points. So it doubles your chance exactly of being approved. Now, even if that is too much, maybe it's let it just be half as much. It increases your chance by 25%. Half of the coefficient may be due to some variables that move, that both variables move together, some omitted variables or something like that. You will still find an effect. So I am, I would think if one would find credible way to estimate this in terms of causality, you will still find a positive correlation. And I tried myself with a, what is referred to as an instrumental variable strategy. They call it the so-so instrument, because I'm not really that convinced by it, even though maybe at first blush it seems reasonable. So as an instrument, I'm using the contribution the Richmond Hotel gives to federal legislators, because federal legislators, they are not going to be able that much to influence state policy. So that is basically, that is highly correlated with state contributions. And when doing this exercise, I find even bigger effects. But my goal is to maybe use a different approach down the line to nail this down a bit more. So this brings me to the end of this presentation. We started out saying barriers to entries create rents. Once there are rents, there's going to be competition to obtain the rents. The competition we're looking here at is in terms of getting the regulator to approve your applications, and we are contributing to a state legislator, and the data are consistent with the effect, with the hypothesis that these contributions are effective, and that if you want to put it provocatively, you could say that certificate of need approval is for sale. Those who give more receive the, and who give at all receive the approval from the state regulator. Thank you.